I am Jenn Kunz. I am a principal analytics architect here at 33.6. We are a small analytics and optimization agency. I've worked on the data collection side of analytics and marketing technology and optimization since 2006 when I started at Omniture. And these days, that looks a lot like I work in tag management systems and data layers. I write technical specifications, I monitor JIRA tickets, and I deploy a lot of marketing pixels. At this point, hundreds, if not 1,000 marketing pixels. And through that, I begrudgingly and accidentally became an expert in consent management and cookies. And I feel like I'm perhaps seeing some things that maybe other people aren't seeing, or the whole industry is kind of struggling right now with wrapping all of these concepts together. So the title of the presentation is Privacy Theater Exposed. That wasn't the original title, but it's alluding to kind of the same sort of security theater that we see at airports where we all have to take off our shoes. We all know it's not actually helping that much, and it's inconvenient and annoying and probably a distraction from other things, but it lets the airport say that, yes, they are keeping us safe and secure, and we all just kind of let that be. It's kind of how we're handling cookies and consent in the industry at the moment. But the original title of the presentation, which when I gave it at Measure Camp in Chicago in September, was The Emperor Has No Clothes. Now, we couldn't go with that because it didn't actually mention what I was talking about at all, but I stand by it. And I'm going to tell you why it was titled that. Now, hopefully you're familiar with The Emperor's New Clothes. I'm actually really happy I found this particular graphic because this is the book I grew up with. But if you're not familiar, at a very high level, there's a foolish emperor who gets conned by a couple of men into buying magic fabric that only wise people can see. And they convince him they can make him a whole wardrobe. And of course, he doesn't see anything because there is no fabric, but he doesn't want to say that because he doesn't want to appear unwise. Same for all of his advisors. Nobody's willing to speak up and say they don't see the fabric. Until finally, the emperor is going through town butt naked, and a little kid who's not afraid of appearing ignorant speaks up and says, the emperor has no clothes. And that's kind of where we're at in the industry right now. There's so many changes with cookies and browser policies like ITP, regulations, server-side tag management. There's a lot of change. And a lot of the consent stuff particularly is hard because there's no clear ownership. You need somebody who understands the legal regulations, but also understands how the marketing landscape works and why we're tracking the things we track, but also understands how JavaScript and cookies work. And that magic unicorn just doesn't exist in a lot of places. So what ends up happening is nobody really feels confident enough to speak up when they see something that just doesn't seem right, like this. Now, I'll warn you now, most of the graphics in this presentation are sad or mad cookie pictures I got off of Reddit. No generative AI was used in this presentation, so thank you to Reddit. But look at him, he's sad. He's sad because he's hearing things like this. Server-side tag management is vital for a cookieless future, and I'm sure we have all heard that. Or this one I found on Stack Overflow of, I'd like to avoid having cookie banner on my website where possible. Could I just put identifiers in local storage instead? Or this one, which has been kind of the focus of my career lately, is every organization these days seems to feel the need to get a solid inventory of all of the cookies on their website. So the first part of this presentation is kind of going to show my issues with that, but I'm betting that a lot of people on the call have seen something like this. Now, this might be generated by your consent management platform or CMP like OneTrust, or it might come from ObservePoint, or it might be homegrown. But the idea is we go through, we figure out all the third-party things and all the cookies that are being set on the site. We have to categorize them. We have to explain what they're doing. And it takes a lot of going down rabbit holes and detective work and figuring out who owns what, and it's hard. And as you can see here, there's some silliness of, no, Adobe Ads isn't even a thing. Adobe Tag Manager is just a JavaScript library. It doesn't track anything. It does not set cookies. It just holds other things. Demdex, this one I can at least see why it was confused, but Demdex is not Audience Manager. It's the Adobe Visitor ID service, and therefore Analytics and Target. So there's a whole lot of things like this, and it's taking a lot of time and a lot of focus. And I'm not going to say that such a list has no benefits. And certainly, I think an approval process for new tags and things like that is very important. But I think when we focus so much on the cookies, we miss some really critical things. And then there's also things like this going on a lot. A few mornings before I gave this presentation in September, I woke up to a very urgent email thread, already dozens of emails deep, of people freaking out because CookieBot had spotted a cookie that was not categorized and was being set without consent. And nobody could figure out who owned it. The developer who could speak to its purpose wasn't awake or something. So we're all going back and forth. Now, mind you, clearly this is in Spanish, which is weird because the team's in Brazil, but there were enough people on that email chain who spoke English that somebody should have been able to say, hey, it's a guest language ID cookie. It's used for language. It has values like EN and ES. This is not a marketing cookie. This helps the website function. It's not scary. It's okay. And frequently the CMP, the consent management platform vendors, they kind of add to the confusion with confusing terminology and focusing on the wrong things. So the whole industry ends up kind of having these freak out moments. Now, it might be that the emperor does have clothes and I'm wrong, and I'd love to hear and understand that. So if you have some insight or perspective that I'm missing, please either comment in this and we'll address them when we get to the end, or find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. No, not Twitter anymore, or Measure Slack. And I'd love to exchange ideas and perspectives on this. But in the meantime, I'm kind of stuck in this mode. It's not just that people are getting things wrong, it's that a lot of time is being spent on the wrong things, and we're missing important things because we're spending so much time on the trees instead of the forest. I'll admit I added this one kind of last minute because I do think it's important. I didn't really know where it fit in the presentation. But any conversation about cookies and consent needs to acknowledge that the internet is not free. It costs money to run a website, and it costs money to create content. And we've gotten very used to the idea that things are free and we feel entitled to free content, but we pay to use the websites that we use in one of three ways. We either view advertisements, hopefully relevant advertisements that are semi-effective and not just a waste of screen space. We can give them our data, like there's a silly app I play every morning that if I want to earn in-game money, I can take surveys and stuff. Or we give them actual money. And this has come up in a lot of different places. You're starting to see consent banners that say either we can set cookies and track you, or you can pay some money. And people find this very kind of icky feeling, but to me it makes a lot of sense because the internet has to run. Capitalism. So we get to choose, and increasingly, hopefully, we will have more choice. But it is very important to remember that it is not just malicious tracking. It is the way that the internet pays for itself. All right. So now that we're clear on that, let's talk about cookies. And the quotation marks are very deliberate here because the word cookies is used for a lot of different things, which makes this cookie very mad, apparently. It's very important that we get the language right, and I'm going to show you why. I do have strong opinions on this. I wrote a blog post about it back in the spring when we were all freaking out about Chrome dropping third-party cookies. It's very weird for me to say, go read my blog posts, because usually if people are on my blog, it's because they found it on Google because they're trying to do a very weird, specific thing like deploy OneTrust through launch or something. But this particular post, you can find it on the 33 Sticks blog. I'm sure we can provide a link somewhere, or on my own blog at digitaldata-tactics.com. I really do hope people read, because I think that's information and perspective that's important to have out there. But if you haven't seen it, at a high level, when the industry says the word cookies, or cookieless, they could be talking about a lot of different things. They could be talking about browser policies like Apple's ITP, or they could be talking about compliance. They could be talking about any number of ways that our data is getting degraded, perhaps because of ad blockers. They could be talking about the identifiers that go into cookies, or a lot of the time they're just talking about tracking in general, that those two things, cookies and tracking, have become synonymous. And I understand the need for a phrase that applies to all of these things that have been changing up our jobs and making our lives harder. But By calling it just cookies, we're focusing on the wrong thing. CCPA, the California privacy law, kind of set the standard for the US and much of the world, or GDPR, the privacy law in the EU. They both only mention the word cookies once, and that is to give an example of a place that an identifier might be stored. It's really not about the cookies. It's about a user's personal data, which includes anonymous web experience data that we are using anonymous identifiers just so that we can know that the user who landed on page A is the same person who viewed page B. That is what it's all about. And this conflation of all of these issues of talking about Chrome dropping third-party cookies, at the same time we're talking about GDPR, it causes confusion like this. This is off of Measure Slack. After we implemented a consent banner, we noticed a big drop in conversions. How do we still get accurate tracking? To which somebody very reasonably replied, well, I mean, that's expected. If 30% of people opt out, you're going to miss 30% of data. It is what it is. And she said, well, yeah, we kind of expected that, but our affiliates are missing orders and therefore commissions, and we are losing our ranking with them. They suggested we use API tracking, which I can get on board with, but also said since they set first-party cookies, it shouldn't be blocked, and they should just be called functional cookies. This is wrong on many levels, and also legally not compliant. But this sort of confusion we see all over the place because all of these issues are getting mixed up together. The other part of that blog post that I want to call out is just that data that we collect online is already suspect and has been for years. Yes, Chrome was going to block third-party cookies, but Apple already has and has been for years, and the world has continued to turn. In fact, Apple makes it so that first-party cookies that are set by JavaScript expire after a week. And these days, Apple has begun blocking even some of those with their known trackers. So third-party cookies disappearing is not going to be the end of the world. But that doesn't mean our data is safe because we still have ad blockers, we have bots, so many bots, and we have folks consenting out of tracking because we've not done a good job of letting them know why they shouldn't be afraid of it. Fortunately, most of the cookies that the web analytics industry works with have long since transitioned to first-party. Even Facebook uses first-party cookies. So first-party versus third-party isn't really the thing. It's all of these things are affecting our data quality, and each of them has different solutions, and we need to talk about them differently. Before we proceed, I don't want to condescend to folks with very rudimentary stuff here, but it's very important that we're on the same page about what cookies do and how they work. So I'm going to lay a foundation here. A cookie is one way, not the only way, but one way we can store information in the user's browser. Literally, it's like I write a number on a Post-it, I leave it on your monitor, and I walk away. It just sits there unless somebody does something with it. In and of itself, it does not transmit data anywhere. The place where it gets tricky is when somebody reads that Post-it note and puts that in something else and sends that somewhere. Now, I do have an asterisk here. I don't need anyone to kind of actually me. Cookies do tend to piggyback on other things. So every time anything flies across the internet, it has headers that help both systems involved know how to work together. And those headers can include things like user agent, but they also frequently include first-party cookies, depending on their settings. So a Facebook cookie might end up being sent to Trade Desk on accident because they piggyback unintentionally. So that is something to be aware of. It's probably too technical of a topic to go into right now, but do know that cookies will piggyback on other things. But if those other things don't exist, the cookie doesn't matter. To the point that if let's say that I'm in the US where our laws say that we can track until so long as the user has the opportunity to opt out. So when the user first lands on the page, we do some tracking, we put some cookies there, we send beacons across the internet. If they opt out, at that point I can remove all of the JavaScript that is sending information elsewhere. But if they're first-party cookies, they're going to stay there. And if they're third-party cookies, I can't delete them if I want to. That is just the way the technology works. So cookies can be very detached from tracking. The cookies that I see on a website are going to depend on me and my browser. It depends on what extensions I have, what other websites I visited, what sites I've logged into, and in some cases, what links brought me to a website. That means that the cookies I see on a certain website are going to be different than what you see, and they're going to be different from what anything that scans sites for cookies like Observe, Point, or OneTrust is going to see. And very importantly, cookies are used for a lot of different things. Like we saw that guest language ID one earlier. When we generally talk about cookies, we are talking about one specific use case, and that is identifiers. Like I said, just even if it's completely anonymous, it's a way for us to know that the user that was here was the same user that was over here, so we can tie their user experience together. But there's not a one-to-one relationship there. Cookies could be used for lots of different things, and identifiers can be stored in a lot of different ways. So they're really not the same thing. And to drive that home, I'm going to do an example here and switch over to a demo. Hopefully y'all can see this all right. I made a very ugly web page. You can tell I used to be a web designer, right? But the goal here was to just have nothing on it, no external files, no images, so that you can see very clearly that the only thing happening here is the HTML that makes these words appear, and I suppose my outdated favorites icon. No cookies are being set. So this is just our baseline, so that we can compare that to what happens once I add a Facebook pixel script to the website. So this is something that Facebook might ask us to add so that they can see that people are converting based off of the ads that people are clicking. When I add that to my website, it dynamically inserts two JavaScript files into the top of the body of my HTML. Those files, in turn, create an FBP cookie. This is the cookie that would show up in cookie audits. You'll see this cookie exists on most of the internet. Right now, it's just a random string of numbers that has no meaning to anyone. And at this point, Facebook doesn't really care about me. It's hoping that if we take that random string of numbers and I tell Facebook that a page view happened, we send that bit of page view information across the internet, and within it, it contains that identifier. So that's somebody using the Post-it note and actually sending that data somewhere. At this point, Facebook doesn't know how to connect that to me, but it's hoping if it collects all of this and eventually figures out that that number belongs to me, Jenn Kunz, that it can retroactively see what I was up to. But at this point, it doesn't have much meaning. But things really get interesting here if I go to the Facebook website. Now, Facebook has a lot of cookies on its own just to, make its website work. Stuff like WD, which seems to be my browser resolution, which is a really weird thing to keep in a cookie, but has nothing to do with me. I'm not really worried about it. But because I've been to this website and Facebook.com has set these cookies, if I go back to my own website that has a little bit of Facebook.com content on it, then those cookies are now on my site. This WD cookie that seems to have my resolution has nothing to do with me is going to show up on my own site. And you might see this sometimes if you have like a Google CAPTCHA, which is a very common CAPTCHA engine, I suppose, Google. It's going to have something on your site that's google.com, and that means every cookie that Google has set at google.com is going to look like it's on your website. It is not being used by you, but there it is. Now, if I log into Facebook, which this week is a very dangerous thing to do, this is a fake account, so don't go looking for me and friend me on this one. So now Facebook has set a cookie, this C user one. This identifier is the one that is tied to me as a person. This 2860 number is how Facebook refers to Jennifer Kunz. And just like the other cookies we saw, if I go over here, now that cookie exists on my website. And it can be attached to every bit of traffic or information I send to Facebook, can now be tied back to my Facebook profile. This cookie is the one that we probably should be a little bit more concerned about, but isn't going to show up in any scans. This is a third-party cookie, because we're taking it from another website, meaning Apple's going to block it, which makes Facebook's life hard. So Facebook has another way of keeping track of things, and that's if I come to the site from a Facebook ad, it's going to attach this query string parameter, FBCLID, and the JavaScript that Facebook appended to my site can grab that query string parameter and use it to create yet another cookie, this time a first-party cookie, FBC, that contains information about the ad that I clicked, as well as my user profile. So this is really the one that we should be concerned about, but it's not going to show up unless you are logged into Facebook and come from a Facebook link. Now, there are other implications of having Facebook script on your site. For instance, if I fill out this form, it really doesn't matter what I put because it's not a real form, and hit submit. I did not deliberately send anything to Facebook, but it set this subscribe button click. It listens for button clicks and link clicks. For a long time, it listened to video plays. And it includes a lot of things like, what are the names of the fields on my form? Fortunately, not the values. That would be terrifying. My page title, my URL, all of that is something extra that Facebook is taking that I did not give them. For a long time, it was doing this with videos. I think they've stopped, though they haven't documented it, probably because they didn't want to call attention to it. But there were a whole lot of lawsuits. I think Walmart lost $150 million. I have 2 clients that were sued over this. And the thing is they're not even over CCPA or GDPR. There are some very creative, litigious types who have figured out how to use old video laws that were made for Blockbuster or wiretapping laws from the 70s to now make it so that even if you think you're following all the rules, you have a consent management platform, you've asked for permission to track, well, you didn't ask for permission to track video because you didn't know you were doing it. So if you don't take anything away from this presentation other than this, go turn auto config, set it to false. Use this one line of code in your Facebook pixel and it'll stop automatically collecting all of those clicks. Okay, so back to the presentation. As a recap, I add the script to my site. It inserts JavaScript. That JavaScript creates a cookie that has a meaningless string of numbers. If I've also been to Facebook, then all of its cookies are going to come over, and the important cookie doesn't actually happen until I come from a FBCLID link, and none of those matter unless they get sent along as information in beacons being sent to Facebook with the information about my viewing. But here's the thing. If I don't ever add that tag, all the rest goes away. I don't have to worry about the WD cookie that apparently has my screen resolution. I, as the implementer of tags, can just turn that one thing off, and the rest we don't have to worry about. And it is so much easier for me to keep a list. I know that the tags I put on the website. Facebook might change the names of their cookies next week. LinkedIn loves to change the domains that it uses for its cookies. It's a lot to keep up with. The thing that is in my control is whether or not I allow this JavaScript to fire with or without consent. All right. So next I want to talk about identifiers, because that really is what this is all about. And that's the problem all of the vendors are trying to solve for as well, that Facebook really needs to know how to tie the things that you are doing back to the ads that you might have clicked, or to tie the things that you are doing to some sort of profile it is building so that it can advertise to you. But it's what's in those cookies that really matters. And vendors are handling this a few different ways. Trade Desk is an advertising vendor that actually is going to be one of those companies that's very affected by the loss of third-party cookies. Lots of people said the world is ending. For them, it kind of is. So they figured out a different way of handling things with the Unified ID 2.0 network. The way I understand it is that instead of relying just on cookies, if I have information about my user like email address or phone number or mailing address or birthday, that I can hash that information and send it along. So if one website knows that Jenn Kunz has this phone number and another website knows that Jenn Kunz has this email address, they all send that together, and the Unified ID network can now connect that email address to that phone number to me. Now, they're very clear that you need consent to do this, but even with that, I as an internet user, do not feel like this is a step forward in privacy. For me, I would far rather my internet viewing be attached to a random cookie in my computer than attached to my name, my phone number, my email address. But, like I said earlier, the internet has to pay for itself somehow, and ad tech is not going to give up. There's also things that we can do utterly without cookies, like With Facebook, let's say I didn't add that Facebook pixel to my site, and instead, when the user clicks on an ad on Facebook, Facebook can see that, they have visibility. And then when the user submits the form, I know their email address, it's part of the form. Or maybe they're purchasing something. I'm going to know their mailing address and their phone number because that's part of shipping things. I can now send that along in the back end to Facebook, and Facebook can make the connection that, oh, this email address belongs to this profile, which clicked on that ad on this day. So all of that can be done without a single cookie. We can also, in theory, use local storage. There's device fingerprinting, IP addresses. There are a lot of different ways that we can use to identify users that don't involve cookies. Local storage is not the answer. So I already hinted at the Stack Overflow question about getting rid of or not wanting a cookies banner. And I would argue this is why we shouldn't call them cookies banners. We should call them consent banners, where he's asking if he can just put the identifiers in local storage. Or there's this from Amplitude. Now, I don't want to throw Amplitude under the bus because they actually have a very solid consent offering. But I will admit a bit of that someone on the internet is wrong energy happened when I was reading their consent documentation, because the whole first half of it talks about a mechanism that they have that will shift everything that they are storing from cookies to local storage. And then later on, it mentions, oh, we do have a true opt-out method. Users might wish not only to opt out of cookies, but also opt out of tracking completely. I can't think of a user or a situation that would want tracking but not want cookies. If users are doing that, then it's because they're very confused, and we've done a bad job of helping them understand why cookies aren't scary. It doesn't harm anything having this setting available, and there are legitimate use cases for using it, but it's not a consent thing. If a user is consenting, then that doesn't mean you, or is not consenting, doesn't mean you can move it to local storage. Generally, no cookies can be interpreted as they don't want to be tracked. Which also applies to something Google's doing now, where if you are using the newest version of Google Consent Mode for Google Analytics or AdWords tracking, V2 Advanced, whatever we want to call it, you can now send little pings of information like this page was viewed. You can send that beacon along to Google, and Google will not create a cookie and will not attach identifiers to it. What it will do is it'll take that data and compare it to all of the consented, more complete data that you have and use its algorithms to fill in the gaps. And it's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's better than just losing 30% of your traffic or 50% of your traffic, as the case may be. Some people might argue that if a user doesn't want cookies, they maybe don't want you to track them at all. But legally, at least Google's army of lawyers has decided that this is a consent compliance way to track even without permission. All right, I use this image. Somehow it comes up in almost all of my presentations because it makes me laugh. But another way that we can handle the way that all this identifier stuff is changing is just to rethink the dependencies that we have. There's a lot that you can do without a cookie, without an identifier, without being able to place it in the full user journey of, what ad did they click 3 weeks ago. A lot of first-party user experience stuff, like are errors occurring on my site? What are people searching for? All of that can be done in just the context of that single click, or at least within the context of a session. A session identifier that expires when the user leaves your site is enough to get you really far for a lot of things. Yes, it will ruin your marketing attribution, where you're doing a lot of creative data things with every touch point that the user has ever seen from your brand. But that doesn't mean that the data can't be used for good. And in truth, it might be good for our industry to focus a little bit more on the user experience and not on the building of ad profiles. You can also do a lot with just trends and comparisons. If you know that 500 people accessed your site today and 300 people accessed it yesterday, then there's stuff that can be inferred there. Or if 30 people landed on your site from a certain campaign and nobody purchased on that day, then you can make that connection. Now, I'm not going to pretend like it will answer all of the questions we currently can answer, but we are going to have to start getting a little bit more creative. Optimization is another thing that frequently can get away with just a session identifier. If it needs a session identifier, it's just to make sure the user has a consistent experience, that they don't get one version of your website until they refresh the page and get a different one. But beyond that, a lot of the time we don't really need to know how it affected them 3 weeks down the line, and it's okay to just have a session identifier. All right, the last part is on server-side tracking. Server-side tracking can do a lot of good things. It has its advantages, but it is a very resource-intensive change to go from client-side to server-side. And it's very important that people know why to make the shift and what they're going to get out of it. Because there's a lot of promises being made out there. I see blog posts like this, solving the GDPR problem with GTM server-side. Or this one, server-side tracking, the future of data collection in a cookieless world. Or this one, no joke, server-side tagging, the messiah of the cookieless internet. Now, to be fair, most of these posts, if you actually drill down and see what they're offering, they do have solutions that help. For instance, this first one, solving the GDPR problem. Well, the problem they're talking about is Facebook tracking stuff without your permission. And yes, server-side tracking helps with that. It does not help you retrieve unconsented data because it doesn't matter if you're client-side or server-side. If they haven't consented, we don't track them. There are other things that can be done that some of these solutions offer. They can help you set cookies that keep Apple happy. They might help with GDPR in where they store and how they process the data. But in general, the selling of server-side, particularly salespeople and headlines and things like that, really convey a false idea of what server-side tracking can help you with. So to demonstrate, like I said, I'm a very example-y person. First, let's talk about client-side tag management. The way that we've been doing things, client-side meaning JavaScript and HTML within the user's browser. If I submit a form on a page, that's going to be sent along to some backend database, CRM, let's pretend Salesforce, sure. And that connection is really solid. Even Apple's not going to try to save us from ourselves and not allow us to share information deliberately with a third party. So the data that exists over here is trustworthy and solid. But we want to know the context around that. Maybe what marketing campaign took them to our website, what pages did they see before they submitted this form, and for that, we need analytics. And for that, we use JavaScript, usually a tag manager like GTM or Adobe or Telium, which allows us to gather all of the information into kind of one JavaScript place and then send it along to all of the parties that we want. The problem is this has a lot of limitations. It can be easily blocked by Apple and by ad blockers. I guess this is neither good nor bad, but the user does have full visibility. If they know what they're looking at, they can see exactly what you're tracking about them. Again, neither good nor bad, but just noteworthy is that we manage consent client side, purely with JavaScript, with a consent management platform that creates a banner, and within your tag management system where you turn tags on and off. As we already discussed with Facebook, these vendor scripts can track more things than we want them to, and that's dangerous. And all of these tags rely on identifiers usually stored in cookies. And JavaScript does not have the ability to create cookies that keep Apple happy. Apple wants cookies that are set by servers because those tend to be not MarTech. So any of the cookies we create with JavaScript is going to be capped at 7 days. And recently this came up in some analysis that was being done. It was a cohort table trying to see how often users returned or how long it took users to return after they made a purchase. And I had to be the jerk that bursted the bubble and said, oh, this client has a lot of mobile traffic, a lot of Safari traffic. If any of their users spend more than 8 days away from the website, when they come back, they're going to look like brand new people. There's not really a way around it. It is what it is. What Meta is hoping people will do is, instead of relying on the untrustworthy JavaScript connection, that you will use their Conversions API to stream data directly from your very trustworthy backend systems to Meta. And we already discussed how it can connect the dots so long as it has some personal identifiers attached to it, albeit with consent, hopefully. But this is what Meta is hoping people will do when it pushes the Conversions API as hard as it's doing. The problem is, is that this requires a different set of knowledge and a different set of people than we're used to working with. I might know JavaScript and double-click tags inside and out, but I do not know how to set up an API that feeds information from backend systems into Meta. So what ends up happening is we resort to what we know, and we do what I think could more accurately be called client to server side tag management, because it still starts with JavaScript. It still has that tenuous connection. But now, instead of sending all of that data directly to the vendors and things like that, we send it to a single place. In the case of server-side tag management, it's going to look like a big Google Analytics beacon is what we're sending. And that goes along to our cloud, wherever we're hosting our server-side tag manager. And in turn, it gets forwarded along to Google Analytics and whatever other third parties we want. As you can see, it still has that JavaScript connection. So while it does have advantages, like a lighter JavaScript library, I feel like this gets touted as an advantage maybe a little bit too much, because unless you have a lot of MarTech tracking or really bad implementation, your TMS should not be slowing down your website, or at least should not be one of your chief concerns. But yes, it is possible, depending on your implementation, that moving to server side will lighten your page weight. It does give you more control. So even though Facebook really hopes that you send them conversions, API stuff from more trustworthy sources, it also really hopes you keep their pixel on their website. You don't have to, though. You can take that away, only send stuff through the API, and Facebook can stop tracking without permission. Server-side GTM can be used to make the type of cookies that Apple likes. I will say, sadly, Adobe's event forwarding can't do this. I think a lot of other TMSs, it might be a hit or miss. There's an asterisk here that this may or may not be a lasting solution. We've been playing this game of whack-a-mole with Apple for years, and every time we find a way around their limitations, they find a way to see through it. So yes, for now, it can help with getting your cookies to have longer expiration dates and be more accepted, but that may or may not be a permanent solution. Another advantage, you can transform the data or enhance it. If I have other customer data in my cloud platform, I can take that and package it up and also send it along to LinkedIn or Meta using server-side tag management. You might get less ad blockers. So if there's an ad blocker that blocks LinkedIn or Facebook but doesn't block GTM altogether or Google Analytics altogether, then yes, this will help you get around that. But these days, increasingly, we're seeing ad blockers also block your entire TMS, which means there's a single point of failure. And maybe it would have been that analytics wouldn't have been blocked, but LinkedIn is, and now you're just going to have everything blocked. Data is still collected and limited by JavaScript. It's only going to, unless you're enhancing it in your cloud somehow, it's only going to know the things that JavaScript knows about that user, and it's still going to rely on identifiers stored in the user's browser. This is kind of a mixed bag. Consent can now be managed on the server, so I'd still send my big batch of data that looks like a Google Analytics beacon to my server, and there I would say, oh, okay, within that I can see that the user did not consent to marketing tags, so I can't send this information along to them. I think there's a little bit of an issue there with accountability, that it's now entirely on your honor whether or not you're honoring people's privacy wishes. But it does make you less of a litigation target. And to be honest, this is the most legitimate reason I see folks turn to server-side tag management. Like I said, I already have a few clients that have been sued, even though they weren't doing anything wrong. Even if they win the lawsuits, their name gets dragged through the mud. They have to spend resources on lawsuit, and moving to a server side protects them from that. There are some other things I didn't list here that, nothing else, server-side tag management comes at an extra financial cost. It also requires a new set of knowledge that it's not enough I know Facebook's JavaScript. I now need to know how to use Facebook's API. So there's also a claim that it helps with bots. I don't understand that, since it's still JavaScript based. If you do understand that, then please let me know. I'd like to know more about that. But that might just be one of the many claims that's made about server-side tag management that's not really founded in truth. What Meta is really hoping people do, and the way that server-side tag management can really help get solid data to third parties, is by using server-side GTM or whatever your tag manager is to pipe information from your backend systems along to your vendors. So to recap, if you're thinking about moving to server-side tag management, it might be a good idea. Just don't have that be your only focus, and know what its limitations are. And then make sure you are still focusing on how do you get more reliable identifiers for your consented users? How do we supplement the data collected online with data that we have offline? And what can we do with our incomplete data? Because we have to come to terms with the fact our data is going to be incomplete. Overall, the takeaways I hope you take from this, just help spread the word. I know that this presentation is not going to make it so that legal teams all over the world say, oh, hey, we don't need you to tell me what that cookie does. But the more people who know and understand this stuff and are willing to speak up, the more we can at least hopefully start focusing on the things that are going to make progress for us in this industry. The cookieless future is not about cookies, it's about identifiers, and it's about ways of supplementing your data with first-party data. And server-side tag management has benefits, but it is not the solution to all of your cookie woes, and just know what its limitations are. And that's it. So now I can go back and see what the comments and stuff are. And hear other people. I've been talking to myself because
I am back, Jen.
How are we on time? All right, we've got some time.
Oh, we've got some time. If anybody wants to post any questions, we could definitely field them.
And yeah, I do see some like Bogdan comments that the server-side GTM, there has to be some very specific things set up for it to be able to set those Apple happy cookies, but it is a capability at least. The line of code for the Facebook auto config, somebody's already on top of it. Thanks for that.
So I do have one question for you, maybe even to kind of prime the jar a bit here. Like you went through and you were showing some some headlines from various posts where people were things that maybe kind of stretch the truth a little bit. What is the most egregious statement you've heard when it comes to cookie compliance?
Oh goodness. I think the ones that get me the most are the things where vendors who should know better are deliberately misleading and say things like it's a first-party cookie, you can mark it as functional and fire it without consent. A lot of folks who should know better are adding to the confusion and chaos, and I think that's the thing that gets under my skin the most.
Oh, we have a good question here from Chris Evans. There you go.
Facebook reps misinformed when they tell us we need to keep our client-side pixel tracking even when server-side is working as expected. I think a lot of this does come down to the identifiers, because depending on what identifiers you have available, you may or may not be able to send Facebook the information it needs to tie stuff back to the Facebook's user profile. If you keep the metapixel on your site, then it still gets to create its first-party and third-party cookies, and some of that would be sent along and kind of wrapped into the overall package that Facebook's getting. But in general, you can get away with not having the pixel script on your site, and Facebook just doesn't want you to do that because it wants all the data it can get.
Awesome. And then Jason has one for you.
I've tried to get information from folks who have implemented server-side, whether or not they've seen an improvement to data quality. It's hard to get that information because there's so much misinformation out there and so much selling of services that tell you that it will solve everything and then no evidence that it actually did for anyone. So again, if folks have good stories of how server-side technology has helped them improve their data quality, I would love to hear it. But for me, I'm still just trying so hard to figure out how data that is still collected in JavaScript and limited in all of the ways that we currently are limited is going to be more solid. I think the closest thing is just the ad blocker thing. But I think, especially with Apple's advanced protection stuff that's coming out now, where even GTM is getting blocked, and even Adobe Tag Manager and Launch and Target are all getting blocked, I think we're going to see that server-side can't save us entirely. Okay, I think my favorite is there are a few folks that I've seen that mark Adobe Target as strictly necessary. Now, Target is called Target, which kind of gets misleading with the fact that we also have targeting cookies, which are something else entirely. Targeting cookies are the things that see that you were looking at barbecues and follow you until the end of time, even though you purchased the barbecue and you're done. Target is first-party optimization that helps people improve their websites. But I know various companies that have used Target to deploy hotfixes to their website because it's so much easier to deploy code through Target than to go through your developer cycle. And so their website literally breaks without Target, whether or not they're using it for optimization. So yeah, I know at least 3 websites that mark Target as strictly necessary because their website would break without it. Yeah, so Bob's been saying kind of what I'm trying to say as well, that your data quality will be so much better if you are sending stuff directly from your backend. And that's, again, I think that's what Facebook CAPI is really hoping folks will do. If you stop relying on JavaScript and instead are working with backend data sets, then yeah, you have a lot more options. I don't know, we're all just going to sit here and twiddle thumbs. Well, I just
Yeah, I
want to know,
think
does this resonate? Do people feel the frustration, at least, of the cookie audits and the consent banners and the places we're putting all of our attention? Or is it just me? Just me being bitter that I've had to spend so much time just doing detective work on what each cookie is. All right. Thanks, Steve. I don't know. I'm happy to hang around. I guess we have 7 minutes till the top of the hour or so at least that long. If anybody, auto blocking. I don't know if Steve's read my blog, but I have feelings about auto blocking. So this is where a consent management platform like Asana or OneTrust not only is in charge of the banner and keeping track of the user's preferences, but also acts as a middleman for everything that loads on your website. So you try to load a file or send something across the internet, it's going to check against a list of domains and decide whether or not that should be allowed through. So it can cancel things. In theory, if you're using AutoBlock, you can fire all the tags that you want and it won't matter because it's going to catch them in the act and stop before they go onwards. But it has a lot of problems. It's easy to mess up. And it, again, is shifting things from focusing on which tags we're firing. And it's so easy for me to flip a switch on and off for like a Facebook pixel than it is for me to tell AutoBlock, these are all of the cookie names associated with Facebook that we want to have blocked. I've seen AutoBlock take down a website. I've seen it allow things through that it shouldn't. And I think more than anything, I get frustrated by it because it's sold as a solution that's going to uncomplicate things, and really it just shifts the complication. Now, instead of a developer having to figure out what tags to turn on and off, you have some poor marketing soul whose job is now to keep track of every cookie and every domain on their website and keep that list updated and keep everything categorized, which is a lot of work. So it is frustrating and confusion for sure. Well, I feel slightly validated. When I presented this at Measure Summit or Measure Camp, the card that you put up your description of your presentation and all of that has checkboxes for, is this technical, is this a panel, so forth. And I had added an extra checkbox for group therapy and checked that because that's what it is for me. I need to get these things off my chest. And I don't think we have the ability to allow anyone to vocally chat at us. So yeah, it is. And it's like I said earlier, it's really hard to find someone who can understand the technical pieces of it, as well as the legal pieces of it, as well as the marketing pieces of it. And the laws, the people making the laws definitely don't understand the technology part of it. That's part of why we do get a lot of focus on cookies and discussion of cookies, which, like I said, there's a lot of fear mongering. I think some of the big vendors and platforms out there like Apple loves to save you from horrible things, but first it has to convince you those things are horrible so it can be your savior. And of course, they have their own. They do not really care about your privacy if you see the things that they are doing that don't involve cookies, perhaps. But they can sell that they're saving you from these things that actually just keep the internet running and don't generally harm you. Oh, good references to past legal folks. I mean, Corey Underwood, absolutely. His blog is, I think, the best in this space when it comes to understanding the legal implications of things. But we, as a consultant, it is terrifying to give any legal advice. And we always have to disclaim it very thoroughly. I'm not a lawyer. If you get sued, don't sue my employer. So I think a lot of folks are kind of frightened to talk about it unless they are, in fact, lawyers and feel really confident in their understanding. Oh, why, thank you. Yeah, this is definitely one of those that I just needed to get off my chest.
Well, Jenn, thank you so much for going through this, and I guess as we wrap up, I know you mentioned in the beginning, where else can folks find you if they have questions after we wrap up?
I'm on LinkedIn, but the probably easiest place to find me is Measure Slack. If you're not familiar with it, give it a Google. It's an industry Slack channel where you can ask and answer questions, and it's all grouped into an Adobe Analytics channel where I spend a lot of my time, or Adobe Launch. But I am all too willingly distracted from my day job with Measure Slack, so you can find me there or on LinkedIn, or apparently Blue Sky now is the place to be. And I think I'm just Jenn.Kunz on Blue Sky, and pretty easy to find. And like I said, I do have my own blog, and I blog on 33.6 occasionally as well. So my own website is at digitaldata-tactics.com. Thank you, Mitchell. I appreciate it. Yay. All right. I guess we'll wrap up with that. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.